Last week, we looked at one of the people of Proverbs, the prudent man or the prudent person. And I thought we'd continue that this week and look at another character out of this book. And we're going to be looking at one that really has more information, more content than the prudent in respect to the number of verses that deals with this particular character quality or virtue, but especially if we couple with it the negative side. And so, as you can see at the top of your page, the title to our message, a theme that we're going to be looking at is the diligent person. And if you thought about the diligent, who is the one that stands out in the book of Proverbs that is the contrast to the diligent? What do you think? What's the contrast to someone who's diligent? Yeah, the sluggard. The sluggard. We don't use that word too much. We're not talking about somebody that's a good baseball player. We're talking about somebody who has neglect, who's lazy. If you think about it, and I think I've made this comment before, that if you think about the idea of being lazy or being a sluggard, that really has become more of an insult today that's kind of hurled at somebody else. Sometimes it is a word of rebuke, but often it is a word of insult. And usually it's said to try to motivate the person to change just by the shame of being called a lazy person. Who wants to be called lazy? No, no one wants that. I don't know that, many people are going to use the word sluggard today, but if you were called a sluggard, you probably have some sort of Bible background in the old King James English, and you would understand exactly what that meant. And I think most people would get the context to it. But we want to talk about the diligent person, the contrast to the sluggard. But we are going to be considering some of the passages that deal with the sluggard, because really the reason why the texts are there in the book of Proverbs is to encourage people to be diligent, to not be neglectful. And I just want to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. The word diligence, today's modern definition would be careful, persistent work. Careful, persistent work is the matter of diligence. But in regards to a diligent person, one Bible website gave this: a diligent person feels urgency over the brief time he has on earth and seeks to wisely use his brief number of days on the few things he discerns to be the most important for him. There's a lot of different things you can pull out of that. But what I want to do is I want to ask us right from the start a couple questions. What are some areas in your life where you have lacked diligence, where you have not been diligent? Uh, I I don't know. I think I'd be very surprised if, given a little bit of time, you couldn't come up with something. Uh, that would be very surprising. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but let me explain what can happen. What can happen to very diligent people is that they can be lazy in certain areas. Is that right? You can find somebody who just seems so diligent, so exemplary, so zealous and careful and persistent about the work that God has them to do. But in some area of their life, you come into that area in their life and you're like, there is an obvious negligence, an obvious lack of a persistent, careful work in that area. And I'm not saying for the outside person to come in and to somehow abuse that diligent person with insult, but the fact is that we have this paradox that you can be a diligent person in some areas, but negligent or lazy or a sluggard in others. I see that in my own life. Absolutely. I could, in fact, take a piece of paper and I could write down some areas where I am lazy or a sluggard in those areas, where I'm not applying what we're going to consider tonight. And I think I could even tell you what I need to do. Now, I even have down here, I said, if you look at the back of your sheet, you have the second question up on the back, or what are the areas of needed diligence in our lives? I just want to do a little test here. Okay. I don't want you to write out the area or areas where you know you are negligent or a sluggard or lazy. I don't want you to write them out in fullness. But if they come to mind, would you put down just the first letter of whatever the area is? Just take a moment, think through it. Is there an area where you are not diligent? You know it's an area where you just, for whatever reason, you don't like to do that, or you don't do it, or you let other things get in the way. And that's often the case with diligent people. They have other things they prefer to do, and they know they neglect these things in their lives. Just take it and just put an initial there on what are the areas of needed diligence in our lives. Just put just a one letter standing for whatever that area is, or if there's several areas, you can put that down. Now, if you've done that, or you've just thought about it in your mind, I want you to think about what you do need to do. What's the action that you do need to take in that area? Like, for example, this happens a lot with men. Men might be very diligent at work, but they may not spend time, you know, ministering to their wives or to their children. So they might put an initial down for that, a W or a C for a wife or children. But then what would you put down that you need to do? What would you put there? For the longest time, I have known that I need to be spending more time taking my wife out so we could have a lot. We have a lot of great connection time. I knew I needed to really have a more fine-tuned time. And, it's interesting. Lately, that's been happening. So I can kind of talk about this without incredible conviction. But after 31 years, you would think, I could tell you, out of that 31 years, there has been many, 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 many weeks, months that have gone on where I haven't we would catch times to talk here and there, but I didn't just take her out for a coffee or for a meal or just to sit down maybe in the living room and talk with her. Uh, just about whatever. It was always trying to deal with different things or talk about things in our lives. And we would do that, but just more concentrated time. And I could write that down. What would you write down that for you would say, in what I know is a needed area in my life where I am not diligent, where I am neglectful or lazy or a sluggard, what do I need to do in corresponding to that? What's the action I need to take? Okay, now, if you've done that or you thought about it, here's the thing. Why do we not do what we know we need to do? Why is that? We can many times, we can identify the areas, we can identify what we need to do, but why aren't we doing it? I think that's a key question we need to ask ourselves. In other words, if we don't resolve the why, we're just going to keep in this cycle indefinitely. And I think that that's something that maybe this passage study or this study of the book of Proverbs might help us with. That as we go into it, maybe it will kick us out to really give of ourselves to those things we know we need to do in areas where, not out of a sense of shame, not that God is insulting us, but he's trying to help us see that we're lazy in some areas. And unfortunately, enough areas of laziness can develop a whole character of being lazy or not being a diligent person. Certainly, we wouldn't want that. So I want us to look at this now. We have 3 points. or I should say, yeah, 3 points. The making of the diligent, the rewards of diligence, and the qualities of the diligent. And let's look through this. First of all, the making of the diligent. As I worked down through the text in the book of Proverbs, and I went through the entire book of Proverbs for this time. At first, I started listening to it. I put it on double speed. Alexander Scourby, the good old Englishman, reading through the book of Proverbs, and I would just follow along. But I found he wasn't going fast enough. I felt like I could go through this and skim it. So I skimmed through the entire book of Proverbs and tried to extract out what we had or what we have there regarding this matter of being a diligent person or not being a sluggard. And I didn't really find something that was the key for being diligent. I found some rewards for being diligent, which certainly are motivational. But if you asked what makes a person diligent, I didn't find the key. But what I did find was this. I found I would call it an inner connectivity in the book of Proverbs, where it would maybe talk about the diligent here, something in their conduct, and then over here, not talking about the diligent, 2 chapters later, there would be something that as I'm going through this rapidly, I would see a connection between this verse about the diligent and this over here, which was motivational. And there was something corresponding within the content of this verse and within the content of this verse that I could get that link between them. And what I would suggest is this. Like many of the different kinds of people or different virtues in the book of Proverbs, they all relate back to the same fundamentals. What is the fundamental driving motivation in the book of Proverbs? What is it? What do you think? Anyone got an idea on that? What is the driving motivation for being a wise person? Yeah. Please the Lord, please your Father. What's another way that that's described in this book? It's right in the beginning. Let's look over at chapter 1. If we're not sure, let's see if it can just lift off the page at us. It says here, if we just look at verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive instruction and wisdom, justice, judgment, equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Did you get it out of there? What is that driving motivation? To please the Lord as your heavenly Father, yes. Look at verse 7. It's there in verse 7. The fear of the Lord. That is the key motivation in this book. You have it over in chapter 9 also. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. I would suggest that diligence is an aspect of wisdom. But it's not going to happen without the fear of God. The fear of God is the one that drives all the different virtues in this book, and it has everything to do with him, with God, and our relationship with him. So I would suggest that there's this interconnectivity, and it all is rooted back to that. Now, let me ask a question. Is it possible to have a certain aspect or a certain virtue of diligence in your life, and for that just to be a matter of your character and a matter of determination, the way that you were nurtured and brought up from the time you were a little child, and you are a diligent person? Is it possible to have that outside of God? Yeah. Just like people have different strengths and weaknesses. But what's true about this book, and what's true of every believer in Christ, regardless of what we were before, we can, by a transformation of the Spirit of God and by the Word of God, become what? whatever Christ-like virtue we see on the pages, including the matter of being a diligent person. So this is why I'm saying this book isn't trying to insult us and shame us into being diligent. That's the way that we might use the word lazy or sluggard in our common way of trying to help somebody change. This is really a gift of God to seek to make us transformed in this area. So let's just look at two rewards of diligence. Two rewards of diligence. The first is simply this: diligence affects prosperity. It has an effect on prosperity. And that passage is Proverbs 10:4-5. He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. He gathereth in summer. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. Another passage, Proverbs 13:4, the soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat. Proverbs 21:5, the thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteousness, but of everyone that is hasty only to want. What is the main driving point here? In whatever area we might consider in our lives, name areas where it would be right and appropriate for us to be diligent. It's every area of who we are, of what we do, of our responsibilities. It's in every area. Diligence affects prosperity in every area of our lives. Why for 31 years did I allow myself to be given to this, or that? Well, really, and not take time to pull my wife apart and say, hey, let's go out and make sure we spend time doing this and this, because I was not diligent. If I was diligent in that and spent that time, do you think it would have affected the prosperity of my relationship with her? Absolutely. Absolutely, right? Diligence affects prosperity in any area. And there is a way in which God has for us. In many cases, I would just say for myself, what would I do? Well, what I would find is I gave myself in too much attention to this, and this. They may be good things, but did I need to do them right then or to that degree, or allow myself to be filled with the joy of doing those things at the neglect of doing better things? I didn't need to do that at all. I was not being diligent in my own character to say no to certain things that were good. And instead, I sacrificed that which was better for that which was good. So it's an issue of diligence in my life. Diligence affects prosperity in any area. Secondly, diligence brings honor. The hand of the diligent shall bear rule. The diligent person will become the ruler, but the slothful shall be under tribute. Proverbs 22:29, seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men. Just recently, a few months back, talking with Luke McCarty, he was talking about this possibility of this job down in Alabama. And I know, just hearing about Luke, talking with him, the guy, when he gets into work, he is a diligent worker. And I just try to encourage him. He is offering a tremendously valuable commodity when he is looking at this job down in Alabama. He's the one offering the commodity. And he is actually the one that's bringing the value to the table. And he goes down there and he's working with that kind of diligence, and it is bringing him honor. It's bringing him honor in a very short amount of time in that place. And that is exactly, but that's the case in whatever area, not just work. Work is one of our responsibilities. In every area of our lives, it brings honor. So there's these rewards of diligence. Well, what about the qualities of diligence? Let me work down through a few texts. The first is in Proverbs 27, verses 23-27. Listen to this. Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well unto thy herds. Now, None of us, well, hold it. Does anybody here have flocks or herds? Somebody has dogs, a lot of dogs. Now, I know if Phil Baxter were here, he has cows. Does anybody have chickens? Do you have chickens out there? Okay. It doesn't say chickens, it says flocks. But what we want to look at and consider is that let's not just think flocks and herds, right? You need to think of that. That was within that economy, but this can be any area of our lives where we have responsibility, where we must apply ourselves with diligence. And then it goes on to say, but for riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation? The hay appeareth, the tender grass showeth itself, and herbs of the mountains are gathered. The lambs are for thy clothing, and the goats are the price of the field. And thou shalt have goat's milk enough for thy food, for the food of thy household, and for the maintenance of thy maidens. Okay, so there's all this benefit at the end. It all has to do with what you're going to do with your flocks, but the key is diligence. That's the key. So let's pull something from that. The diligent value possessions. The diligent value possessions. I did want to say the diligent value valuables, but there was too many values in there. The diligent value possessions. They see what they have, whatever it might be. And they see that there's value there, and they will respond to it in accordance with that. And if you look back up the text, it's because those possessions are fragile, but it's also because those possessions can yield incredible, great reward. So this would be the case in our walk with the Lord, our personal character, our marriages, our children, our homes, our church ministries, our work, and everything. This is the flock. This is the field. And there's tremendous reward, but what's going to bring the prosperity is that the diligent are going to put value on all of those things. They see every relationship as tremendous value, every opportunity that the Lord gives as tremendous value to that. Every friendship, obviously their marriage and their children, everything that God gives for them to do within the church or within work, or the things that God has given them to oversee, whatever vehicle they might have, or their home, all these things, they see that there is value in it and they respond accordingly. They keep that value ahead of them. They're never despising it as if it's not of any value. Secondly, Proverbs 6:6-11. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little slumber, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. Subpoint B is the diligent don't require external oversight. Somebody who's diligent doesn't mean they don't have a manager, but somebody who's diligent does not require somebody to be over them all the time. I've mentioned this before, but just listening to some different sources about business and things of that nature, one of the business models is that you are given, if you work for this company, you are given limitless vacation. Okay. What do you think about that? How are you responding? What's that? Yeah. So how are you responding in your heart? Okay. The moment I say to you, okay, if we had a company, every one of us has limitless vacation. How are you responding in that? No. What's that? No, there's no as long as. There's no as long as. You get limitless vacation. Okay, after the smiles, after the humorous thoughts about that, after all this, you know what kicks in? your integrity, your character kicks in. And you know what? You, in most cases, if you are a diligent person, and they wouldn't hire you if you weren't, you are going to fulfill everything, and there's going to be something in you that knows that this would be too much or not. In fact, in some cases in this kind of business makeup, certain people have to be encouraged. You need to take vacation. And they have limitless vacation, self-governed, limitless vacation. And sometimes they have to be told, you need to take vacation. You know what's going to happen with people like that? They have some vacation coming up. They have a project due. They are going to burn the midnight oil to make sure it gets done, to make sure they put in the work. They don't need an overseer. A diligent person doesn't need one. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't need accountability one with another, but it's saying that they are self-motivated. They're self-motivated. And it says this as well, they provide her meat, they provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. The diligent provide for all seasons of life. Diligent provide for all seasons of life. When it's bountiful, they can just go out, they gather it in to eat, but they're also going to be gathering it up for when it's not bountiful. Paul said this, I know how to be abased and how to abound. Fourthly, subletter D, the diligent don't indulge in, I just put R and R. They don't indulge in R and R. Well, what do we see there? In the text, it talks about them sleeping, that they're not given to this sleep. But we also have this out of Proverbs 20, verse 13. Love not sleep, lest thou come to poverty. Open thine eyes, and thou shalt be satisfied with bread. He that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. He that loveth wine and oil shall not be rich. So I'm saying R and R, not just sleep. I'm talking about, because we have sleep, we have travel, we have wine and oil, or partying and pleasure, all those things. Okay? The soul of the diligent person isn't finding their satisfaction of their soul in pleasure, in rest, and in sleep at the neglect of what God has given them to do. They don't find that. What is our culture turning to more and more in the United States? It is an entertainment culture. Even when I was young, it was all about the weekend. I know it was because this was before I came to Christ. I took my paycheck and I blew most of my paycheck the very first weekend I got it. It was all about the pleasure. It was all about the rest. You know what happens to you as you get older, and especially if you have been diligent day after day, month after month, year after year for a few decades? How much or how frequent do you need to really set your alarm to wake up in the morning? In fact, you don't. It's not a problem of you sleeping too much. You wish you could only do what more? Sleep a little bit more. I mean, you just are. It's the weekend. It's Saturday. You go to sleep Friday night. You think, oh, I have nothing to do tomorrow. I'm just going to sleep in. And I mean, you're up early and you might as well just go down and get your cup of coffee and have your Bible reading time, and maybe you'll get a nap later in the day. The diligent don't indulge in these things. Next text is Proverbs 14:23. In all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury or to poverty. The diligent recognize the profitability of any and all work, of any and all work. Proverbs 18:9, he also that is slothful in his work is a brother to him that is great waster. Proverbs 19:15, slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. Proverbs 19:24, a slothful man hideth his hand in his bosom and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. But the diligent, they see profitability in any and all work. Have you found this? After however many years, have really sought to be be careful and persistent and perseverant and faithful in your work. Have you caught this yourself that if you get really tired and you're working, you get really tired, that instead of going and thinking, well, I'm just going to stop working for the day, what you say to yourself is, I'm just going to shift and do this work over here. And then I'm going to come back and do this harder work. Then a little bit later, I'm going to go over and do this work. And you find yourself, because there's this value, see, yeah, it may not be the hard work of this day, but as if I'm going to rest in doing this work. And then I'm going to get back to the hard work of the day. And when I get wiped out, I'm going to rest by doing this work, because in all work, every work, there is profit. Every kind of work has profit to it. And then you have this text out of Proverbs 6. Oh, I'm sorry, not Proverbs 6. I jumped up on the page. Out of Proverbs 20. The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold, therefore shall he beg in the harvest and have nothing. The diligent rejects excuses not to work. There, the sluggard says it's too cold outside. In Proverbs 22:13, the slothful man saith, there is a lion without, I shall be slain in the streets. So whether it's a difficult situation or a nonsensical excuse, the diligent man rejects them all. For him it is, I have responsibility, I have an obligation, there's some area in my life, what do I need to do to give myself to it? And then the last text is in Proverbs 24:30-4. I went by the field of the slothful and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding, and lo, it was all grown over with thorns. The nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. And he goes on to describe the sluggard and how he just goes to sleep and he stays to sleep. And this is the last point. The diligent understands and avoids the dangers of neglect. With neglect will come ruin and deterioration of all those things we saw value in back in the first point, our possessions, or our relationships, or our ministries that we have in the church, or our friendships, our marriages, our relationships with our children, whatever it might be, in the workplace, whatever it might be, our actual property. The diligent understands if we are neglectful that will deteriorate. So they give themselves, they avoid the dangers to it. Now, I have a question here. What is the greatest illustration of a diligent person in the book of Proverbs? When I say greatest, I'm talking about content. What's the largest content given regarding a person in the book of Proverbs that is exemplary as a diligent person? Can you think of that? What's that? The virtuous woman, exactly. You got the V and the W, the virtuous women. Proverbs 31:10-31. I don't have time to read through the whole text, but in that text, she gives herself to diligence in all that she does. She rises early and is eager to give herself to her work. She works with the future in mind. She has actually, over this period of time of being a virtuous woman, she has developed strength and character to continue to give herself to diligent work. In other words, it's built upon itself. She works until it's all done. She just keeps working until the very end. Her candle goeth not out by night. She prepares for difficulties, so she's not afraid of snow for her household, or her household's clothed. She enjoys the blessings of diligence in her life and for those she loves and cares for. She carefully oversees her responsibilities, and she's guided and motivated by her relationship with the Lord. It says at the close of that, but the woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Again, getting us connected back. The diligence comes, the virtue comes in our relationship with God in New Testament context in Jesus Christ. The Spirit of God changes us. So let's go back to the question, what are the areas of needed diligence in our lives? Okay, what if you put down something there, if you thought about it, what are they? Well, I would suggest that if we can face all of this and it not stir us, then we are not responding in the fear of God. That's what I would suggest. What's needed is to recognize these are motivations and driving forces to work in us to change us. Let me ask a question. What is the most important area of diligence in our lives that we need to give ourselves to? What would you think? Well, if you said your spiritual life or your relationship with Christ, that's where I would put it. In the text of Proverbs, listen to this. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. 2 Peter 1, and besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith. It talks about these virtues being in you and abounding in 1 Peter 1. It says later on in 1 Peter 1:10, give diligence. And then in Philippians 2:12 and 13, it says this, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It says in Ephesians 5, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Let me give us another translation of that. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time. That goes all the way back to our first definition from that Christian website about a diligent person. So I believe the primary area and from which this virtue will really be built out in our lives is what are we doing in our relationship with the Lord? I mean, I'm just assuming, my assumption, especially for those who come on Wednesday night or Sunday night, is that you have a regular time, day by day, where you are feeding your soul in the Word and in prayer. I hope that's the case for your own growth in grace. I hope that's the case. But if not, let's give ourselves in even a greater way with zeal, because out of that will grow this virtue into other areas. Let's pray. Father, I do thank you so much for your grace.